beaten and battered. You had 2 dead. You had multiple wounds in several of them. Bob Younger's elbow was shattered with some of the gunplay out in the street. And what they did was took a southwest course from here. Here was Northfield. People know where Mankato is. This is again the bank where they thought about robbing early on. But they took this circuitous path. 2 weeks on the run. The banks are very upset by now with their continued robbery. So rewards are not only from the local bank, but rewards are posted from bank associations. So that drew a huge number of people for the posses, and there was a huge manhunt going on. So they were short horses, they were wounded, they didn't have a guide to get them out of Minnesota, and then it rained for a solid week. So they were kind of wandering around most of the time on foot, trying to navigate the lake country down here. And after about a week, Jesse and Frank were actually healthier than everybody else. And they decided they would break off from the other guys. And they did. They stole some horses, and then they made their way to South Dakota and back down to Missouri to safety. So then you had the Younger brothers and Charlie Pitts. Those are the 4 that remained. And they were again on foot. And you know, you had, sometimes they would stop at farms and sleep. They would pose as posse members themselves. And as you can understand that not all posse members had the same enthusiasm for engaging these guys, so they probably, you can guess people might have looked the other way or not been as vigilant when they were staking out bridges or key intersections throughout that area of the state. But they got to Mankato on foot, and they snuck by there, and they were still making their way on foot 2 weeks later, when there was a 16-year-old farm boy who, these guys, he ran across them, and they had stopped to sleep in a barn and get breakfast one place. And he said to his father, "I think those are the people they're looking for." And the father cautioned him to just stay out of it. You know, these are ruthless men. We don't want to have anything to do with it. Well, you know how 16-year-olds are. That he ignored his dad. He got on a horse and he rode into town to Medelia and said, "I think those are the James Younger people you're looking for." Well, Medelia formed a posse, which included what they called the Magnificent Seven, those men there. And again, they'd had military experience in the Civil War, so they were not unacquainted with firearms. Well, they tracked these guys down. They were on foot, as I said, and they got them into a corner where they had a river on 3 sides and then this opening. And these guys walked in shoulder to shoulder, and again, there was a fierce firefight for about 5 minutes. Back and forth, back and forth. These guys came out with only one guy having a flesh wound, but they, excuse me, killed Charlie Pitts, and they put about 12 bullets in Jim Younger and Cole Younger as well. I mean, they had multiple wounds on each side. So they finally, with Pitts dead, the Younger brothers all gave themselves up. They brought them back to Faribault, which was the county seat here, and in those days, if you were charged, they were charged with 3 crimes. One, the murder of Haywood, the death of Nicholas Gustafson, and then the theft of the $26 from the bank. And in those days, if you were charged with a capital crime and went to jury and were found guilty, you would be hung. If you pled guilty, you would get life imprisonment. So they did the math and said that they pled guilty to all these things. But they never revealed who had killed Haywood. They kept mum on that and were quite discreet about that. So they ended up in the fall of 1876, they're in Stillwater Prison and will be there for the next 25 years. Bob Younger got a lung issue because of some of the wounds he encountered in Northfield in the manhunt. He died in, let's see, that was 1889 of some of those lung issues. Cole and Jim were finally paroled in 1901. New legislation passed and allowed people who had served up to 24 years to be paroled with conditions. They weren't to leave Minnesota, and they weren't to enter into any contracts. Well, while they were in prison, Jim Younger had fallen in love with a newspaper reporter who was visiting him, Alex Mueller. He wanted to marry her, but that's a contract that was denied. He had kind of a depressive streak anyway, but he ended up in a hotel in St. Paul and killed himself over that. So 2 years later, people were just tired of the whole thing, and they did pardon Cole Younger, and he was under the condition that he leave Minnesota and not capitalize on his outlaw past. But as you can see, he did. You know, he went on some what they call motivational speaking engagements and talked about what life taught him from his outlaw experience. Jesse James and Frank, remember they escaped. Well, if you remember the dirty little coward who shot Mr. Howard, Bob Ford. And by the way, there's a movie that Brad Pitt was in called about that chapter of the story. It's very, very good. It's not a real shoot 'em up, but when you think about how the paranoia kind of had a grip on Jesse James and how that played out, it's actually a very good movie. But in 1883, in St. Joseph, Missouri, Jesse has tried to reconstitute the gang a number of times, and he invited Bob and Charlie Ford in to work with him. Well, by that time there was a reward for Jesse James in Missouri, and they took the opportunity and killed him in his home. And that was the end of Jesse. Frank, at that point, turned himself in and subjected himself to a number of trials based on different charges of bank robbery, and with sympathetic juries in Missouri, he was acquitted on all counts. And he too went on just to lead a fairly normal life, racing horses, working in different places in Kentucky and beyond. He and Cole Younger did link up at one point and did some Wild West shows. And then actually he died of natural causes. And then about 1916, Cole Younger died, and why we are pretty sure it was Frank James who had killed Haywood is that on his deathbed, Jesse James Jr., Jesse's son, was visiting with Cole, and he asked him who actually killed Haywood. And Cole was known to be kind of vague and elliptical. You couldn't trust a lot of what he said, but what he did communicate at that point was the man who killed Haywood rode the dun horse. And we know from other records that Frank James was the one who purchased the dun horse in Red Wing prior to the raid here. So that's our best evidence that we can put that act on him. There's some mementos here, some artifacts from the raid. I'll just let you